Hey y'all, I am excited to be here. Thank you for attending my session on the Illustrated Guide to Node.js. Can you believe it's November already? Because I can't. Did y'all have a good Halloween? Did you see anything scary? Did you see anything scary as this? So I don't know what your feelings are about JavaScript, but just to get one thing clear already, Node.js is a whole bunch of JavaScript. So if that's daunting, or it can get better, but it is one of the reasons why I really like to use Node, is because JavaScript is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's you can use it for building back-end APIs, for front-end web applications, for mobile apps, desktop apps, command line tools, Internet of Things. I think that's amazing that you can take one language. I mean, not that there aren't other languages that can span a lot of things, right? But JavaScript seems to be like the language, for better or worse, that's everywhere and taking over everything. It is the internet, right? But similar to that line in Jurassic Park where it talks about scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't really stop to think about whether or not they should. Like similar, JavaScript's like, yeah, you can use it everywhere. Maybe might not be the best solution everywhere. But I think it's really, really powerful, and it's pretty cool stuff. So in this 45 minutes, we're going to talk about why you might consider using Node.js, what it is, and I'm going to give you some examples, show you some code. Maybe you won't be so scared of it if you decide you want to pursue it, and give you some frameworks and tools and things that I recommend to get you started. So my journey with Node started around 2014. Up until that point, I had spent many years on the Microsoft stack of technologies, working for different software companies, doing ASP.NET, C#, SQL Server, a lot of that kind of stuff, but also building web applications and using JavaScript and a whole lot of jQuery. That's what was, big around that time. So I spent many years doing that. So I was with a startup company, and we were building a SaaS product. It was a web-based application, and we were starting to run into some frustrations with the Microsoft stack of technologies. Now Microsoft has gotten so much better since then, but we were starting to doubt if we were using the right technology for the things that we were trying to do at that time. And so we started to look at what are some alternatives, what are some open source tools that we could build, add into our tech stack, our architecture. What are some things we could do differently? And Node was an opportunity for us to, because we were all like web developers, hey, we already kind of familiar and know how to use JavaScript. Let's explore what's available to us on the back end as well. And we started moving to a new architecture that included Node.js for back end, microservices. We were using tools like RabbitMQ and Redis, and some just a lot of open source stuff. And could we have done those things with .NET? Maybe. At that particular time, there was not a whole lot of love for open source outside of Microsoft, other than ASP.NET MVC. The drivers that were available for those non-Microsoft projects it was just so much better in Node. So JavaScript, by focusing on JavaScript, it helped us to improve our skills in that area, so we became better front-end developers as well as back-end developers. It helped our collaboration across the entire stack, and it helped us to recruit more developers. Like instead of at this time I was living in the Nashville area, and the Nashville tech community, there was a lot of competition for .NET Microsoft Stack developers. So once we started moving our architecture to more open source and Node.js, that kind of opened up the possibilities to hire basically anyone with web experience. And that was actually a really positive thing for our team, because then we could hire folks who come from other backgrounds and other technologies, who had different experiences and different exposure to tech, that helped us to, get a bigger, broader perspective on how to solve challenging problems in our company. We found that it was, there was cross-platform, there was less friction overall, and it was just, you can't discount the joy and excitement of learning something new. I mean, that's kind of what we do, right, in software development. We love to, find some bright, new, shiny object and play with that for a while. So it was a lot of fun to do that. There are tons of great articles and case studies that have been published over the years on why you might consider using Node, and they all resonate with the experiences that I've had in the companies that I've worked for since moving to Node. And there's things like productivity and satisfaction, recruiting, and all those things that I've already mentioned. And the interesting thing is, like, the improvements of maturity and I guess the joy of working with, if you can say joy of working with JavaScript, right? But it does tend to get better and better. So there was an article posted not too long ago called Node.js is Here to Stay, and there's a bunch of stats and metrics to build a case of why Node is continuing to grow. And it also talks about some of the newest features in Node, gives you an overview of security and support and those kinds of things. So I recommend you check out this post and at the end I'll give you a link where you can go and find all of these articles and resources and things, frameworks that I'm talking about and everything. So you don't have to furiously try to jot down a URL or a title or anything. It'll all be there in the end. So to me, Node.js exemplifies that KISS principle. No, not that kind of KISS. The keep it super simple. Start with one thing and do that one thing really well, and that's what Node does. It's JavaScript. It's got a handful of libraries, services, and it executes JavaScript, and it does that one thing, and it's always been focused on that one thing, and doesn't try to be everything to everybody. The community surrounding Node is what provides all that additional kind of value for things that you may be looking for. So use cases for Node is basically the internet. If anything and everything you can imagine you want to do that's web-based, Node is a great candidate for, or an alternative. But it's as I've mentioned before, it's more than just a back end. You can use it to automate things. You can build command line tools, microservices. You can control Internet of Things. You can build desktop apps, which is one of the coolest bits of technology that I've worked with in recent years. I love to use, and that's Electron. If you use Visual Studio Code or and there's a bunch of other applications like Slack and Figma, and there's the GitHub desktop. All of these are built with Electron, which is essentially a combination of Node and Chromium, which is the view engine of Chrome, bundled together. So you can use all of your web skills to build desktop applications that can be as native appearing or as unique to however you want to build and style those things. Because you're using CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, you can do just about anything you want to do on the desktop. And I think that's really, really cool. Other case studies, Walmart, PayPal, Fandango, they've all published some of their findings with their experiences of moving from whatever architecture that they had previously over to Node, and how they've increased productivity, increased responsiveness and requests per second, and all those kind of measurements. Node is also great for folks who are involved in DevOps, with it being a very low overhead, and it's cross-platform, and all the kinds of tooling and stuff that's available can make it a great utility for automating things and creating those kind of continuous builds, continuous integration architectures. So Node in a nutshell. Node was first introduced in 2009, so it has been around for a while. It is, as we've talked about, JavaScript. It is a JavaScript execution platform, can execute all things JavaScript. It is built on the V8 JavaScript engine that the Chrome team has built and has been continuing to improve and optimize year over year ever since. It is the most optimized, most efficient JavaScript engine available. And one of the things that's cool about Node and the fact that it uses V8 is that, I don't know if you're aware of this, but every year the JavaScript language continues to improve. There are new proposals and new things that come out as part of the language that go through a release cycle where they are kind of put out in beta, so to speak, so that people can play around with those proposals before they are finalized. Well, since Node uses V8, you can also access and test those new JavaScript language features from Node, but using experimental feature flags from the command line. So it's a great way to stay on the cutting edge of the JavaScript language. Because it is JavaScript and because it's run on Chrome V8, it is a asynchronous programming model. You probably, if you've used JavaScript, you're probably already aware of things like promises and async and await and those kind of things. Those mechanisms for doing asynchronous programming are, absolutely necessary to be successful in writing Node.js applications. It also makes it a very efficient system for doing I/O and throughput, because it is a single-threaded event loop. Not that there aren't other threads that you can take advantage of. It absolutely does take advantage of all the threads on your system, but because of the programming model being single-threaded, you don't have to, think about multi-threading most of the time for most of the applications that you would ever have to build. So it just makes it super intuitive and easy to reason about. The community for Node, you could say this about a number of languages too, but the Node.js community is pretty amazing with the resources that are available, the packages that are available. There's a lot to take advantage of in the Node community. So I've already poked some fun at JavaScript, right? If you've been around the internet for a while, you probably have your own stories of frustrations with using the JavaScript language. The truth is, JavaScript was pretty awful in the early days, especially if you're trying to do cross-browser, type things, where it'd run fine in Internet Explorer, but wouldn't work in Netscape or whatever it is that you were trying to do. It was an awful time to be a software developer if you had to live through those days. But JavaScript is an easy target, and I do get a few laughs at JavaScript's expense, but JavaScript isn't what it used to be. There have been so many improvements in the last 10 years, and what's cool about Node is that you can use the latest and greatest JavaScript language features without having to think about transpiling or cross-browser type thing. If you're using Node, on the back end, you can just use the latest and greatest JavaScript language features, and you're good to go. So NPM is kind of, people refer to it as Node Package Manager or modules. It is basically the repository for all things JavaScript at this point, and it's the largest ecosystem of open source in the world. There's over 2 million modules available. Not that they're all great, but if you can think of a problem that you want to solve, you can probably find one or more packages on NPM that can help you with whatever you're trying to build. Last year they crossed more than 1 billion downloads per day, so that's a lot of traffic. It's crazy. This is not a super interesting slide, probably, but what it boils down to is that Node is on a yearly cadence of software releases, and they are dedicated to supporting versions of Node for several years. And what happens is there's a cycle of a new version of Node comes out. It goes through an active release cycle, and then it goes into maintenance mode. When it hits active, it also is declared long-term support, and so that version is going to be around and supported with bug fixes and security fixes and things for a long time. So the bottom line is, if you're working on a new production app today, you should be targeting version 20 or 22. If you target version 22, that's going to be supported well into, I think it would end of life in April of 2027. So you got plenty of runway to use that version of Node. This also means that version 22 just came out in last month, and it is using the latest version of Chrome V8. And it has a number of features like Node Run, which is a way to run tasks that's much more efficient than using NPM scripts. And there's a native watch mode. That means you can launch a Node application and it'll watch your source code. And if you make any changes to JavaScript or whatever, it's going to automatically relaunch your application for you, so that you can just continue to build and test without having to restart your web server or services or anything, that kind of stuff. Version 22 is significant because it got a new mascot. There's never been a mascot for Node, but the turtle on a rocket is kind of an inside joke. It's been around for a long time. People, when Node first came out, it was people complained about it being so slow, like strapping a rocket to a turtle, and it's like, we'll own that, right? But the thing about V8, it compiles your JavaScript to, at runtime to, just like any other kind of JIT compiler, and it's native at that point, and it's going to run just as fast as just about any other kind of code that you can write. So why did the spider get glasses? She wanted to improve her website. That's terrible, huh? So, it has nothing to do with this talk. I'm just throwing in a little segues. Installing Node.js, you can go to the nodejs.org and download the binary, but I would not recommend you do that. If you really are serious about learning Node and want to use it as part of your development system, I suggest that you use NVM, which is Node Version Manager. So go install that on your system. If you are on Mac or Linux, you can use NVM directly. If you're on Windows, I highly recommend that you install the Windows subsystem for Linux and use that as your development environment for Node. Not that you can't use your normal command prompt or PowerShell to run Node. You can, but the NVM utility and the other kind of Unix or Linux-based utilities are really handy to have even on Windows. So install NVM first, and then you can use that to install any version of Node. You can have multiple versions of Node installed on your system, so you can switch from one to another with an NVM command. NVM use 22, NVM use 20. If you want to go back and test something on version 20, or if you have an older application that you need to support. When you install Node, you get 2 command line executables. You get Node and npm. That's amazing, right? Wow, 2 command line executables. So Node is used for executing your JavaScript code. It includes the bare minimum core library of things like working with the file system, working with HTTP, data streams, reading environment, debugging, data streaming, so forth. npm is that Node package manager or modules that's used to manage your dependencies and run scripts as part of your project, such as your tests or builds. So when you are fresh creating a brand new Node.js project, you're going to do something like, create a folder, you're going to change into that folder, and the first thing you want to do is run npm init. That is going to create a package JSON file that includes all the metadata and is like the file that's your repository or keeps track of what dependencies you have. So it's going to ask you a number of questions like what's the project name, which defaults to the name of the folder. It's going to ask you for a version and description and entry point and what kind of license you want to flag. None of those things are like super important when you're first starting. It's just, tap through the questions and away you go. So as soon as you initialize your package JSON, you probably want to install some additional dependencies, and you'll use npm to do that. Npm install Axios would install, one of the most popular HTTP libraries. So if you're going to be making API calls to either something internally or something externally, you may want to use something like Axios. Node has fetch built in, so if you're already familiar with using fetch in the browser, you can also use fetch inside Node as well. But Axios and a few others have, some additional features that aren't available to fetch that can be very useful. If you want to install a developer dependency, meaning this is something that you're depending on locally, but it's not something you want to have running in production, then you can use the either the save-dev flag or the -d flag. And typically when I set up a brand new Node project, the first thing I'm going to install is ESLint and my own ESLint configuration library that has the rules and syntax and formatting that I like to have in my projects. I'm going to walk through a number of examples of what Node typical JavaScript code looks like in a Node project so that you can be familiar with that. At the top of most JavaScript files in Node, you're going to see this require statement. That's how you reference dependencies in your code. And require is used to bring in built-in modules as well as modules that you bring in from npm and modules you build yourself. So require is like your imports or using statement, if you will. So this one brings in the file system module that you'll use to read and write files. Require for Express would be like if you installed Express using npm, it's the same exact syntax. Express is arguably the most popular web framework for building web applications for Node. And if you have a local module that you've developed, imagine this is this file named API service.js. You can require that in using a relative path syntax, and you do not have to use the .js extension to pull that in. All of this code by the way, are examples of common JS. It's a way of managing dependencies or writing traditional Node.js code. It may look a little bit different if you're building modern front-end applications where you're using import and export and that kind of syntax. That is ES modules. So ES modules is supported by Node and is becoming the standard for which to build Node applications. But I'm showing you these examples because 99% of the examples that you find on the internet, if you go and look for how do I do this thing, is going to be using this common JS syntax. So let's talk about that asynchronous development patterns. So the one that's the oldest and still kind of like probably more prevalent in a lot of the examples that you find on the internet, especially the older examples, is going to use callbacks. Callbacks are a kind of a way of declaring a function inside JavaScript that is going to take 0, 1, or more arguments to that function, and then the last argument of that function is a callback function. It can be expressed inline like this, or it can be another function that's defined somewhere else in your code. But this is the typical pattern that you're going to see. I'm going to call method with a callback. I'm providing 2 arguments, bacon and 42, and I'm passing in a callback function. Like, go do this work, and when you're done, call this next function. And that function signature almost always looks like, the first argument is an error object, and the second argument or other arguments are the results that are returned back from that callback. So you want to check the error if there was an error and do something with that, and then do something with the results. So that's the old way. Hopefully you're not having to build any applications that use callbacks today. Just be aware that this syntax still exists in a lot of examples and a lot of code that, if you're having to support someone else's code. Then we got a better solution. We got promises, where we can, instead of using a callback function, we can chain together promises. We can call a function and says, go do the work, and then when you're done, then this. And you're using, you can use things like arrow syntax and all those kind of goodies, where you can say, you can chain those together. You can have a catch that's going to catch errors, and you can have multiple thens. You can have multiple steps in your code, like then, do this work, call another asynchronous function or promise-based function, then again, and you can chain those together, which can also get interesting and fun to kind of follow that logic. And then the more modern approach is using the async and await keywords, which are fully supported in Node. You can declare a function as an async function. You can call other async functions and use the await keyword to just wait on those results to come back instead of having to chain them together or having to use callbacks. So it produces less code, and it's easier to kind of follow along and to understand. And another cool thing is you can use try catch. You can wrap all of your code around try catch and use better error handling around those things. So I would say, hopefully, if you're building Node.js applications today, you should be using async and await and, having more fun with JavaScript instead of less fun. So here's an example of creating a module in Node.js. So I've got this temperature.js file, and in it I've got a number of functions and a object that has some constants, part of that. So the functions are convert to Celsius, convert to Fahrenheit. I've got an object that includes some properties like freezing Celsius and freezing Fahrenheit. And then at the end, the magic syntax for Common JS is to export a object or a function, or it can export anything, but the typical pattern is, hey, build up whatever the interface is going to be for this module and export that to the rest of the world. And then somewhere else in your application, you may have, I'm going to require that module in. I can access the properties off of that object. I can access the functions that are on that object, and I can, have a nice little temperature module that I can use anywhere else in my Node application. Now, I talked about ES modules. That is now a thing. And, my recommendation is now, you should be using ES modules going forward for building new Node.js applications. You're going to see less examples of this on the internet, but this is definitely the future for Node and all of JavaScript, really, at this time. So you'll use import instead of require to bring in that stuff in. The recommended syntax for built-in modules now is to use a node : prefix. So that's like namespacing stuff that's built into the Node framework. You can still use FS by itself, but the recommendation is that going forward, you should use node : FS instead of just FS by itself. And then we can export functions, we can export objects, export variables, any of that kind of stuff. So I have this function called readFileJSON that takes in a file name, and I can export that. And then somewhere else in my project, I can import that function from my ES module and call that function. Well, in this example, I'm also building a URL that's it's kind of weird. One of the kind of side effects of using ES modules in Node is that we can't just use regular file syntax because ES modules live both in the web and locally. We have to use URL syntax to declare, even if it's a local file. So like file : / kind of syntax. So we use the URL from that's built in to figure out where that file exists locally on our computer. So I can read that in using async and await, and go to town with that. One more example I'll give you is typically you're going to build a back-end application. You're probably going to use some kind of database. There's lots and lots of options available. This was kind of like when Node supported Microsoft SQL Server. That was like my opportunity to finally, fully jump ship from .NET world to Node.js world. And so there's several great SQL Server modules available for working with SQL Server, but there's also Postgres and MySQL and anything and everything else out there under the sun available for Node. So in this example, I'm getting the SQL connection as an environment variable. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is if you're not familiar with working in a Linux environment, configuration is often done using environment variables. So instead of like a config file or something else, you oftentimes will set environment variables, and you can access those using process.env to get to those environment variables. So I have an async function that takes in an email. It's going to create a SQL connection. It's going to make a request. It's awaiting that request using a parameterized query where I'm setting the email address. I've got my query defined, and then because it is async and await, it's going to go and make that query against the database and return the results and assign it to that variable called result. And then again, using the module dot exports, the magic syntax to expose this as to the rest of my code. I'm going to show you a quick example of a Node application. So I do like me some bacon. You've probably you've probably heard of the Ipsum generator, where you have to generate a bunch of dummy text as placeholder to like create your web designs and stuff like that. Well, I created a bacon Ipsum generator, and I can say, give me about I don't know, 5 pounds of bacon. Click the make the bacon, and now I've got my filler text that I can copy and paste into my web design to this may be the most important web application I've built in my career. Does come in handy. So how did I build this? This is an application built with, I'm using Fastify as my web application server. I'm using Tailwind for CSS, and I'm using Vue for the front end. And what I just want to highlight a few things. I'm not going to walk through the entire project, but the package.json file that I mentioned earlier, when you install Node and you run npm init on a new project, it creates this package.json file. And this is a place where you're going to define scripts. You're going to see like your dependencies that you installed. Like you can see here, these are my developer dependencies: ESLint, NodeMon, Tailwind, and then I have production dependencies like Fastify and Vue, right? So this is the metadata that gets sent with your application. So when you go to deploy this in production, your production build type system is going to read package.json, install these dependencies, and knows that to launch your web app, it needs to run your main entry point for the application. So I have these scripts defined like build and dev and start, and what you saw me do just a moment ago was run npm run dev, which is the script that is defined here. So it's using NodeMon, it's watching for changes to any of the JavaScript, HTML, or CSS files, and it's also running the build, which is my Tailwind, and starting or launching the application. So typically in a web application, there's no magic to like folder structure or anything like that, but the kind of common pattern that you see in a lot of web apps for Node is you have a source folder that has the source code for your back end. You have a public folder, which may be like public assets, images, CSS, and so forth for the front end. And then you have maybe a test folder for any unit or integration tests. And inside the source folder, you can structure that however you want, but you probably have at least one. You have an entry point for the application that's going to bring in your dependencies. Like in this case, I'm requiring in Fastify my routes. I'm getting my environment variables, and I'm creating that server and launching it, registering the routes, and listening for HTTP connections for anyone who wants to visit that web app. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. This is, when you're looking at examples of how to build something on the internet, like how to get started building a Fastify or an Express application, it's going to follow these kinds of patterns pretty closely. It's going to look very much like this. Hopefully, it may be using ESLint or not, ES module syntax, your import and export syntax. Like I said, that's kind of the the path going forward, and I will update these examples to use ES modules. So there's my slick demo. What does a computer like to snack on? Computer chips. Womp womp. So to wrap things up, some of the popular tools and modules that I recommend. I've talked about ESLint. This is going to check your JavaScript syntax, look for any kind of common mistakes or errors that may have occurred. Since JavaScript is a dynamic language, you may declare a variable and not ever use that variable, or you declare it one way and actually use the wrong name or case somewhere else. ESLint can help you to avoid some of those mistakes. NodeMon is I showed you that earlier. It is a way to automatically restart your development server. It is, even though Node now has a native way of watching your file system for changes and restarting, NodeMon has been around since the beginning of Node and has a lot more features. So I still recommend it. Is a superior way to manage your development and build cycles. There's test frameworks, like there's a built-in Node framework for testing now, and it's getting better and better. There's also like Jest and Mocha that are super popular for Node. And you don't have to use a mocking testing stub type system for tests, but because JavaScript being a dynamic language, you can kind of create a lot of that stuff yourself without using an external library. But if you do, test double and sign on are good. Recommended tools. .env, you can, instead of like actually creating environment variables on your system, you can use a .env file, which is a kind of like a configuration file. Makes it super easy, especially in development environment for managing your configuration of your application, like ports and secrets and things. FS Extra is has all of the file system module that ships with Node, but also gives you other great shortcuts like reading and writing JSON files and some other nice utilities. And you can see the other things that are on there. One of the cool things I like to use a lot is I end up using Node to create a lot of scripts to automate things, either as part of my build process or part of my normal day-to-day life, that I want to automate something, right? So I build a command line application to automate something, and I'll use something like Commander that makes it super easy to support command line flags and arguments and things for those applications. And then you can use something like NEXE to turn any Node command line app into a standalone executable. So like compile that to either whatever your local operating system is, or you can also compile to other operating systems. So you got someone in your organization that needs some help automating something. You can build them a script and compile it to an executable for their Linux machine or their Windows machine, and just give them that utility to help make their lives better. Common frameworks. Express, as I mentioned, is arguably the most widely used, most common, referenced. Almost every example of how to build something is going to use Express as the example. Caveat, Express hasn't matured. It is a mature framework. It's been around for a long time, but it hasn't advanced in a long time. Version 5 just came out last month, I think, and that was from version 4 to version 5 was something like 10 years or more. So it's like, in open source world, that's kind of tough, to like not have advancements on a framework like that long. I think they are going to, it sounds like they're going to, make some quality improvements to it. But Fastify, Nest, I've been using Fastify for the last couple of years. I really love it. It's being used by Capital One and Walmart and American Express and a bunch of big companies now. So it's really supported and advancing all the time. Talked about Electron for building desktop applications, and there's many others. There's a lot of great frameworks. Integration strategies. There's a lot of companies like introducing Node. All of those companies that I mentioned before have kind of followed the same pattern, where you introduce Node as like a proxy into your application, where traffic or requests come to your Node application, and then Node can route either that request to either something that's native to Node that it can fulfill itself, or it can turn around and make a request to your legacy platform, and over time you can re-implement more of your legacy app into your Node application, and eventually you should be able to eliminate whatever that legacy backend is. Walmart, the way that, as an example, the way they took their approach to adopting Node is they started with their mobile application. They proxied every bit of their mobile traffic through Node.js, and over time they eliminated all the other services and other back-end systems until everything was running on Node. By the way, they deployed their first production Node application on Black Friday 2013.
What?
Not, who could imagine a better time to deploy, a brand new system?
I would quit. Nope.
But it was a huge success, and it's like this wonderful, beautiful case study for Node about how amazing it is and resilient and efficient. Nginx is another kind of proxy type platform or utility that you could use to like sit in the middle between your clients and your legacy and new Node system, and use it to route things. And I've had some good success with using like a messaging based architecture, where you could have like, some things are taken care of by your legacy system. Some of it can be services that built in Node, and they're all just listening to messages on a message queue, and things get routed wherever they need to go that way. All right, I know we're a few minutes over time. Last thing I want to tell you is that you don't need permission to be awesome. So get out there, geek out about some technology, learn some new things, have fun with it. But I want you to encourage you that those of us who are like software developers, for 99% of the rest of the world, what we do is like pure magic. And we can do things that other people can only imagine or dream of. We have the power to make a positive impact on our communities and our workplace and the entire world with the things that we build and create. So I encourage you to look for opportunities where you can make a positive impact. Thank you very much.